The night Sarah Calloway showed up at my door, I had a half-eaten bowl of leftover chili on the coffee table, a game on the television I wasn't really watching, and no idea that the next 10 minutes were going to pull the floor out from under the life I thought I understood. It was close to 9 o'clock on a Wednesday. Not late enough to be alarming. Late enough to be wrong. I heard the knock and figured it was my neighbor Carl coming to complain about the oak tree again. Carl had opinions about that oak tree that went well beyond what any reasonable man owed a piece of lumber. I turned the volume down and crossed the door without hurrying. When I opened it, Sarah was standing on my porch with her arms crossed tight against her chest and her eyes red from crying she was trying not to show. I said her name before I could think of anything else to say. Sarah. She looked at me the way people look at you when they have run out of other options. Not like you're the answer. Like you're the last door left on the street. Can I come in, Nate? I stepped back and let her through. She stood in my front room without sitting down. Her jacket was damp from the drizzle outside. Her hands kept moving to her sleeves, smoothing them, pulling at the cuffs like her fingers needed something to do so the rest of her didn't have to fall apart. I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. I noticed that and did not say anything about it. Is Marcus here? She asked. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Marcus hadn't been to my house in 4 months, and Sarah knew that better than anyone. Marcus Calloway had been my best friend since we were 15 years old, since we played on the same terrible high school baseball team and lost 30 games between us without ever once quitting. He was the best man at the wedding I never had, the guy I called at 2 in the morning when my dad got sick, the person I trusted more than anyone I had ever known. That word had a timestamp now. No, I said. He's not here. Sarah pressed her lips together and nodded like she had expected that but needed to hear it anyway. Then she sat down on the edge of my couch, which was the most careful way I had ever seen a person sit. Like the cushion might give her away if she let her weight go fully. He told me, she said. I stood near the kitchen doorway. I didn't sit. I wasn't sure I could. Told you what? She looked up at me then, and something in her face was past pretending. About the money, Nate. About what he did. Underscore. My name is Nate Calloway. Not our Calloway, mine. That was the joke Marcus and I always made when people got confused. Same last name, no relation. Just 2 guys from the same part of Ohio who ended up living 3 blocks apart, marrying into entirely different lives, and staying friends the way men sometimes do when they're too stubborn to let distance win. I was 36. I ran a small electrical contracting business out of a shop on the east side of town. Nothing flashy. Residential work, the occasional commercial job when I had the crew to handle it. It was enough to keep my mortgage paid, enough to keep 2 trucks running, enough to feel like I had built something that held its shape under pressure. Marcus worked in finance. Not banking exactly. More the kind of work that sounded important when he described it at dinner parties and that I had stopped asking about years ago because every explanation left me feeling like I had missed a crucial chapter somewhere. He made good money. Better than me. He always had. He drove a nice car. Wore clothes that fit like they'd been measured. He was the kind of man who looked like he had things figured out. I had never once questioned whether he actually did. That was the mistake. He had borrowed money from me 14 months ago. $42,000. That was not a small number. That was every spare dollar I had managed to set aside over 8 years of building the business, plus a personal loan I had taken out against the shop equipment, plus 2 credit cards I had cleared out because Marcus said he needed it fast, and I was the only person he trusted, and it would be back in 60 days, 90 at most, and I would never even feel it. I felt it. 90 days became 6 months. 6 months became a year. A year became 14 months of text messages that said things like almost there and the deal is close and I'm good for it. Nate, you know me. And I didn't know him. That was the problem. I knew him well enough to believe every single one of those texts because the man who sent them was the same man who had driven me to the hospital at 3 in the morning when I cut my hand open on a saw blade, who had shown up with a cooler full of food the week after my dad's funeral without being asked, who had once sat with me on a tailgate for 4 hours just because I was going through something I couldn't name and didn't want to be alone with. You don't stop trusting a man like that overnight, even when the numbers stop adding up. Even when the calls start going to voicemail. Even when the story keeps changing in ways too small to grab onto, but too consistent to ignore. 4 months ago, Marcus had stopped returning my calls at all, and I had let it go longer than I should have, because letting it go felt less painful than what admitting the truth would cost me. Sarah sat on my couch and told me what she had found. She had gone looking for their tax documents and found something else instead. Not a smoking gun, not some dramatic hidden file, just a pattern. Transfers she didn't recognize, account numbers she'd never seen, money moving in directions that didn't lead back to anything she could point to. So she had asked Marcus, and Marcus, apparently, had told her enough of the truth that she couldn't unfind it. He borrowed from 3 people, she said. You, his cousin Derek, and a guy he works with named Paul. He borrowed from all 3 of you in the same 90-day window and told each of you it was temporary. She paused. None of it is coming back, Nate. There's nothing left. The chili on the coffee table had gone cold. I didn't remember sitting down, but at some point I had. Where is he now? He left this morning. She said it flat, no drama in it. Like she had already used up whatever emotion belonged to that sentence and was running on the other side of it now. He took 1 bag in his car, and he called me from the road to say he needed time. Time. I thought about that word for a moment. I thought about what a man packed into 1 bag when he needed time and where he went with it, and how much time was actually time versus how much time was something else entirely. Did he say where? His brother's place in Pittsburgh. Maybe. She looked at the floor. He said he'd explain when he was ready. I rubbed both hands over my face. The television was still on, muted, the game moving in the background without me. 2 teams I didn't care about playing a game I couldn't follow anymore. Sarah, I said, why are you here? She looked up at me, and for a second, she looked embarrassed, like the question had caught her in the middle of something she hadn't finished deciding. Because I didn't know where else to go. She shook her head slightly, correcting herself before I could. That's not fair. I'm here because you deserve to hear it from a person, not a phone call. And because whatever Marcus did, he did it to you, and that means something to me even if it doesn't seem to mean much to him right now. That was an honest answer. Uncomfortably honest. The kind that lands heavier than a polished one, because you can hear it hasn't been cleaned up for your benefit. I sat back and looked at her. Really looked. Sarah and I had known each other for 6 years, the length of her marriage to Marcus. We had sat at the same tables at a dozen dinners, traded opinions on movies neither of us had liked, talked across Marcus at football games. She was warm and sharp in equal measure, the kind of person who asked good questions and remembered what you said the last time and made you feel like you had been actually listened to instead of just heard. I liked her. I always had. But she had been Marcus's wife. That was the identity she held in my life, the frame around everything else. I was starting to understand that the frame was in the process of coming apart. You want coffee? I asked because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. She almost smiled. Yes, please. Underscore. We sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours that first night, not solving anything, not making plans. Just 2 people going through the same storm from different angles, comparing notes out of necessity rather than comfort. She told me about the last 3 months, the way things had fell off without her being able to name why, the way Marcus had gotten defensive about small things, the way he came home later than he should have and left earlier than he used to and stopped asking her questions about her day the way he always had. She hadn't suspected money. She had suspected something else, which made it worse, somehow, finding out the truth. Because the truth was still bad, but it was different bad than what she had been preparing herself for. I told her about the phone calls. The way the texts had thinned out over 6 months from detailed and apologetic to brief and vague to almost nothing. The way I had talked myself out of being angry every time I felt it rising because I kept landing on the same argument. This is Marcus. This is the guy I know. He'll come through. She listened without trying to defend him. That surprised me. Not because she owed him her defense, but because most people, when they love someone, find a way to soften the corners of what that person has done. Sarah didn't do that. She sat there and absorbed what I was saying and nodded in the places where the facts were simply facts. You gave him the benefit of the doubt, she said. For 14 months. So did I. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. For 3 years before that. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, the drizzle had turned into real rain, tapping against the window over the sink in a slow, steady rhythm. What are you going to do? I asked. She looked down at her hands. The place where the ring wasn't. I don't know yet. She said it carefully, like she was testing the weight of not knowing instead of trying to escape it. I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to sit in that house and wait for him to figure out when he's ready to explain himself. That's fair. I have a sister in Columbus. She looked up. I think I'll go there for a few days. Figure out what the ground looks like from a distance. I nodded. That makes sense. She looked around my kitchen slowly, taking in the old table, the mismatched chairs, the coffee maker that had seen better years, the stack of electrical supply catalogs near the back door that I kept meaning to file and never did. She looked at all of it with the kind of attention people give to ordinary things when ordinary things are the only things standing between them and something too large to face directly. I'm sorry, she said finally, for what he did to you. I know that doesn't fix anything. It helps more than you'd think, I said, and I meant it. She left around 11 o'clock. I walked her to her car and stood in the drizzle while she buckled in and found her keys and looked at me through the window in a way I couldn't fully read. Not sad exactly, not relieved, something in between. Something that looked like a woman carrying the weight of a decision she hadn't finished making yet. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner and then went back inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. $42,000. Marcus. Those two facts did not belong in the same sentence, and I'd spent 14 months making them fit by rearranging the words every time they stopped making sense. I picked up my phone. 14 messages in the last year from Marcus. I read them backward, from the most recent to the oldest. Almost there. Deal is close. You know I'm good for it. Something came up. Next week for sure. Just a little longer. I promise. I promise. I promise. Then earlier, you're my best friend, Nate. I wouldn't do this to you. Then the first one, 14 months ago, the one that started everything. I need a favor. Big one. I'll explain when I see you. I set the phone face down on the table. I thought about calling him. I thought about it for a solid 10 minutes, running through every version of that conversation I could imagine, and every version ended the same way. With me having said what I needed to say and nothing having changed. No money back. No explanation that explained enough. No way to unknow what I now knew. So I didn't call. I went to bed at midnight and lay awake until 2, and then finally slept the way you sleep when you're too tired to stay upset and too upset to rest properly. Sarah called me from Columbus 4 days later. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because I hadn't figured out yet what category she belonged to now. She wasn't Marcus's wife in the same way anymore. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a friend in any clean sense of the word. She was something the situation had created that didn't have a comfortable name. I answered anyway. How are you doing? She asked. Honestly? Obviously. I've been better, I said. I've also been worse. It's a weird place to be. I know that place. She paused. Marcus called my sister's house. He wants to talk. What did you say? I said he could write me a letter first. She said it without heat. Just matter of fact, like she had considered the options, and that one made the most sense. I'm not ready to hear his voice on the phone and have my reactions be live and unedited. I need to know what he's actually saying before I respond to it. That was a sensible way to handle it. More sensible than anything I would have managed. And Derek? Did he reach out to Derek? No. Short answer. Heavy landing. Of course he didn't. Derek was Marcus's cousin. Blood. The kind of person Marcus could avoid without a social consequence. I was apparently in the same category. Has he called you? She asked. No. A pause. Then, quieter. I'm sorry, Nate. Stop apologizing for him. I'm apologizing for my own sake, she said. Because I vouched for him to you. Not in so many words, not on purpose. But I was his wife for 6 years, and I sat next to you at a dozen dinners, and I talked to you like he was the man I believed he was. That's a kind of vouching. I hadn't thought about it that way. You didn't know. No. But you trusted him partly because of me. Because of us. Because you saw us together and thought, that's a solid man. She exhaled slowly. I think about that. There was a kind of honesty in that conversation I wasn't used to. Most people, in Sarah's position, would have been focused on their own damage. The marriage, the money in their joint accounts, the life they were watching come apart. Sarah was doing that. But she was also carrying something for me, and she hadn't needed to, and she was doing it anyway. I didn't know what to do with that. When are you coming back? I asked. This weekend, maybe. I need to get some things from the house. A pause. Will you be around? Yeah, I said. I'll be around. Underscore. She came back on a Saturday afternoon with her sister's car and 2 empty boxes. I helped her carry things out because she had texted and asked if I would, and I said yes without overthinking it. That was the right call. We worked without talking much. She moved through the house the way people move through places that used to belong to them and now feel like they're on loan. Careful, methodical, not letting herself look too long at anything that wasn't what she came for. At one point, she stopped in the hallway holding a framed photo and looked at it for a long time. Marcus and I at my cousin's lake house, maybe 5 years ago. Both of us sunburned and laughing at something off camera that I couldn't remember now. She handed it to me. You should have this, she said. I looked at the photo, looked at his face. The thing about Marcus was that he looked exactly the same as he always had. Same grin, same way of standing with his shoulders back like the world was going to move aside if he waited long enough. I couldn't find the lie in the photo, which was the whole problem. The lie had been dressed in the same skin as the person I knew. Sarah, I said. She looked at me. Did you see it coming? Any of it? She thought about that honestly instead of answering fast. That was one of the things I had started noticing about her. She thought before she answered. She didn't use the first available words. Not the money, she said finally. I saw something. I called it stress. I called it his job. I called it a rough patch. I gave it every name but the right one because I didn't want the right name. She folded her arms over the box. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not that I was fooled. That I participated in fooling myself. I looked at the photo again. Then I put it in the box. Me too, I said. We loaded everything into her sister's car by 3 o'clock. She stood on the porch for a minute, looking at the house like she was saying something to it that didn't need to be said out loud. Then she turned back to me. Thank you, she said. For this. Don't mention it. She smiled, and it was smaller and more real than any smile I had seen from her in all the years I had known her. I keep saying I'm going to stop thanking you. You keep finding new things to thank me for. That's fair. She looked at the yard, the street, the ordinary Saturday afternoon going on around us. I'm going to figure things out. I don't know yet what that looks like, but I'm going to do it. I believed her. The same way I had believed a lot of things from a lot of people, except this time it didn't feel like faith. It felt like evidence. Because I had watched her over the past 2 weeks move through one of the harder things a person can move through, and she hadn't crumpled, hadn't looked for a version of events that let her avoid the hard parts, hadn't asked anyone to carry more than their share. "I know you will," I said. She drove away. I went back inside and stood in my front room for a while, not doing anything in particular. The house felt the same as it always had, and yet something had shifted in it. Some quiet thing I couldn't have named before had been named now, and I was going to have to figure out what to do with that. Underscore 24 underscore 24 underscore underscore underscore. Marcus finally called me 3 weeks later. I let it ring twice before I answered. Not to make a point, just because I needed 2 rings to decide I was ready. "Nate." He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had recently put it down in the wrong place and was now living with the consequences. "Marcus." A long pause. "I know I owe you a conversation. You owe me more than that." "I know." Another pause. "I owe you the truth first, though, and I wasn't ready to give it until now. I kept thinking I could fix it before it became this." He exhaled. "That was wrong and stupid, and I don't have a better word than that." I sat down on my couch and looked at the spot where Sarah had sat that first night. "Are you going to fix it?" "I'm going to try." He said it carefully, without the old confidence behind it. The confidence I had always associated with Marcus was gone, or at least quieter. He sounded more like someone in the process of learning that trying wasn't the same as promising and that the distinction mattered. "I'm seeing someone here, a counselor, working through how I got to this place. I'm not saying that as an excuse." "Good, because it isn't one." "I know." We talked for 40 minutes. He explained some of what had happened, the business deal that had fallen apart, the attempt to cover it, the borrowing that was supposed to be temporary and became permanent the way temporary things do when you stop looking at them. It wasn't a satisfying explanation. There wasn't one available. He asked how Sarah was. I told him I wasn't the right person to answer that. He didn't argue. At the end, he said, "I don't expect you to forgive me right now." "Good," I said, "because I don't." "Okay, but I'm also not going to pretend 21 years meant nothing, just because the last 14 months were a lie." I paused. "That doesn't mean we're fine. It means I haven't decided yet." "That's fair," he said. "That's more than fair, Nate." I hung up after that and sat with the call for a while. 21 years. We had been friends for 21 years. Long enough that his voice still sounded like the person I trusted and not the person who had taken $42,000 and stopped returning my calls. That was the complication nobody warned you about. People thought betrayal was simple. You trusted someone, they broke it, you were done. But 21 years didn't sit quietly on one side of a line. It leaked across. I wasn't ready to forgive him. I wasn't ready to be done either. I didn't know what came next. I just knew I was going to have to sit with that uncertainty and not pretend it wasn't there. Underscore 24 underscore underscore underscore. Sarah called that same evening, which had not been planned. She had no way of knowing Marcus had called me. I hadn't told her. "He called me too," she said. "Today? This morning." "What did he say?" She was quiet for a moment. "A lot of the same things, I imagine." Explained. Apologized. Said he was working on himself. She paused. "He cried at a point. That caught me off guard." "Did it change anything?" "It changed how I felt while he was crying." She said it slowly, like she was measuring the weight of the sentence. "It didn't change what I know." Another pause. "Those are different things, and I'm trying not to confuse them." That sentence sat in the air between us. "You're very good at knowing the difference," I said. She laughed once, softly. "I have had a lot of practice distinguishing between what I feel and what's true. My feelings about Marcus have always been large. Larger than was probably wise." A pause. "That's why it took me 3 years to see what I was looking at." "You're not looking at it wrong now." "No." She said it with a kind of quiet finality. "I'm not." We talked for another hour, which surprised both of us. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Marcus or money or the pieces of the last several weeks. She told me about a project she had been working on before all of this, a renovation on a house she co-owned with her sister, something she had been putting off because Marcus always had reasons why now wasn't the right time. She was starting it now. She was done letting now not be the right time. I told her about a job we had bid on, a larger commercial contract that would mean hiring another electrician and buying a fourth truck and doing the kind of expansion I had been considering for 2 years and finding reasons to delay. I wasn't going to delay anymore. $42,000 was a significant hit. The response to that hit was not to shrink. The response was to grow until it was proportional to something I could handle. She liked that answer. I could hear it in the way she went quiet for a second before responding. That's the right way to think about it, she said. It took me a while to get there. Worth the time. Underscore. There was a moment about 6 weeks in when I understood something that I had been keeping at a careful distance. It happened at the hardware store on a Tuesday. She had texted me about a fixture her sister's contractor had gotten wrong on the renovation, sent me a photo, asked if I knew what the right part number was. I answered, then offered to stop by and look at it on my way home from a job. She said yes. I showed up with the right part and 2 coffees and spent 40 minutes fixing something that should have been straightforward and wasn't because the contractor had done the prep work incorrectly. Sarah held the flashlight while I worked, which was more useful than it sounds. She asked good questions, not show me you're impressed questions. Actual questions about how the fixture was supposed to be anchored and why the previous approach had been wrong and what I would watch for going forward. She was genuinely interested in understanding what she was looking at. On the way out, she said, "You know you didn't have to do that." "I know. You could have just told me the part number." "I could have." She looked at me for a moment in the fading afternoon light, and something in her face was different from what it had been 6 weeks ago. Not less serious, less braced, like a person who had been waiting for something difficult and had realized that what was actually in front of her was something else. "Nate," she said. "Yeah." She didn't finish the sentence right away. She looked at the house, then at the street, then back at me. I need to say something clearly before we end up saying it badly later. I waited. She pressed her lips together once, gathering the sentence. I'm not someone who moves from one person to the next without thinking. I'm not in a place where that would be honest or fair to either of us. She met my eyes. But I also am not going to pretend I haven't noticed something, because I think you've noticed it too, and pretending would be its own kind of dishonesty. My chest was doing something complicated. "What have you noticed?" She smiled, and it was small and real and entirely her own. "That talking to you is easy in a way that doesn't feel temporary." I looked at her. The evening had gone soft around us, the light going golden the way October light does when it's trying to remind you summer is gone. She stood there in a jacket and work jeans with a smudge of drywall dust on her sleeve, and she was the most straightforwardly honest person I had been in a conversation with in longer than I could remember. "I noticed that too," I said. She nodded once. "Okay, then, that's enough for right now." "Yeah," I said. "It is." There were things that had to happen before anything else. That much was clear to both of us, and we didn't have to say it in so many words. Marcus and Sarah had to finish the end of their marriage properly. Not fast, not messily, not with the kind of bitterness that takes years to clear out. Sarah was not a person who would leave things ragged if she could help it. She was going to do this right, which meant it was going to take time, and time was something neither of us was in a position to rush. The money was its own separate thing. Marcus had made a payment through his brother in Pittsburgh, $12,000, a third of what he owed, with a letter saying the rest was coming in installments. I didn't know whether to believe it. I chose to wait and see because waiting and seeing was more honest than deciding ahead of time. Derek had gotten nothing yet. Paul from Marcus's office had filed a civil claim. I hadn't done that. I was still deciding whether to. Sarah's sister told her, at some point, that she thought Sarah was getting close to me too quickly. Sarah told me about this conversation without me asking. She was direct that way. She said her sister meant well. She also said that her sister had a tendency to mistake recovery from one thing for rushing toward another, and that what was happening between us was neither. I appreciated that she told me. I appreciated more that she was paying enough attention to the difference to put it into words. Underscore, 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 underscore. The first time we had dinner that wasn't by accident or proximity, it was a Thursday in November. She suggested a place downtown, a small Italian restaurant she liked. Nothing formal about it. We sat at a corner table and ordered food and talked for 3 hours, and the check sat on the table for 45 minutes while neither of us wanted to end the conversation. She told me things she hadn't told me before, from before Marcus, from the parts of her life that existed before I knew her. She grew up in a small town in southeastern Ohio, 2 sisters, a father who worked in manufacturing, a mother who taught elementary school and had opinions about everything and was almost always right. She had come to the city for college and stayed because the city kept giving her reasons to. She had almost moved to Portland once, 7 years ago, to take a job she thought she wanted. She hadn't. Sometimes she wondered what that version of her life would have looked like. Sometimes she didn't. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in a long time, about my dad and the years after he got sick and what that had done to my understanding of time, about the business and what it had taken to build it from nothing and why I had built it instead of taking the easier path, about the way I had let relationships drift over the years because I was better at being reliable than at being present, and I had finally started to understand that reliability without presence wasn't the same thing as showing up. She listened. She asked good questions. She pushed back once when I said something that wasn't quite honest, and she did it without making a confrontation. Just tilted her head slightly and said, "Is that actually what you think, or is that the easier version?" I like that. I like that she wouldn't let me take the easier version. The harder one, I said. That's what I thought. She smiled in her wine glass. Say that one. So I did. Understood. Underscore. Marcus signed the divorce papers in January. Not without difficulty. Not without one more phone call to Sarah that she handled with more grace than he deserved and more honesty than he expected. She called me afterward and her voice was quiet and a little unsteady, and I sat on the phone with her for an hour without saying much because that was what the situation asked for, and she asked for it without having to ask. The next week, she called again. This time, her voice was different. Not lighter exactly. More settled. Like someone who had put something down and wasn't going to pick it back up. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay, when I showed up at your door in September, I wasn't thinking about you as anything except Marcus's friend who deserved to know the truth. I want you to know that. This didn't start as something I was looking for." "I know," I said, "but somewhere in between the hardware store and the Italian place, and every honest conversation we've had since then, I stopped thinking of you as Marcus's friend." A pause. "I started thinking of you as mine." My chest went tight in the best possible way. "Sarah, I'm not rushing," she said quickly. "I mean that. We're going to do this slowly and carefully and correctly because you deserve that, and I deserve that, and the only way this works is if we build it right." Agreed, but wanted to say it out loud, so that it was said. "I'm glad you said it," I told her. "For the record, since we're saying things." She laughed softly. "Yes. I started thinking of you as mine somewhere around the time you made me say the harder version." Quiet. "Then, that was a good night." "Yeah," I said. "It was." Underscore. There were people who had opinions about it. There are always people with opinions about things that don't belong to them. A few of Marcus's friends looked at me differently for a while. My neighbor Carl, of all people, made a comment at the mailbox that I didn't dignify with an answer. Sarah's sister came around eventually, about 4 months in, when she saw that what she had been worried about wasn't what was actually happening. Lauren from my crew asked me once, with a bluntness that only people who have worked for you for 5 years can manage, whether I thought it was complicated. I told her it was. She nodded and went back to work like that was a satisfying answer, which I suppose it was. The complicated part wasn't Sarah. The complicated part was grief, which was the right word for what losing a 21-year friendship felt like, even when you understood why you had lost it, and even when losing it had been the only honest response. Marcus and I were not enemies. We were not friends. We were two men in the long, slow process of figuring out what we were to each other now that the version we had been was gone. He sent the remaining $30,000 over 8 months. He sent a letter with the last payment that I read once, and then folded and put in the desk drawer without answering. Not because I didn't have things to say, because I wasn't ready yet to say them cleanly, and I didn't want to say them any other way. Maybe someday. I was keeping the door at a crack rather than shutting it entirely, because that felt more honest than a decision I wasn't ready to stand behind permanently. Underscore. In March, I fixed the porch steps at Sarah's sister's house. It was a Saturday. Sarah was there helping paint the trim on the front windows, her hair pulled back under a bandana, a streak of white paint on her forearm that she didn't notice until I pointed at it. She looked at her arm, then at me, then she laughed. The kind of laugh that takes up the whole room even when you're outside, the kind that makes you aware you have been waiting for it. Very professional, I said. I'm an artist, she said. This is a texture choice. That's a white trim color on your actual skin. Intentional. She went back to the window, stopped watching me paint, and fixed the step. I went back to the step. An hour later, she appeared beside me with 2 glasses of water and sat down on the porch railing while I finished the last board. We stayed like that for a while. The neighborhood going on around us. Traffic, a dog somewhere, a kid on a bicycle making 4 slow loops around the cul-de-sac without any obvious destination. Good step, she said. It'll hold. Things you fix tend to hold. She said it simply, not making a speech out of it. Just an observation. Just a true thing stated plainly. I looked at her. The afternoon light on her face. The bandana. The paint on her arm she still hadn't wiped off. The calm way she sat with the world going on around her, not performing anything, not managing anything, just present. Sarah, I said. She looked at me. I'm glad you knocked on my door. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought I had miscalculated the tone. Then she set her water glass down on the railing carefully. I was terrified to knock on your door, she said. I sat in my car for 10 minutes first. I didn't know that. I know. I didn't want you to see me being scared. She looked at the street. But I'm glad I knocked too. For more reasons than I expected. We sat together on the porch until the light started to change. Neither of us had anywhere pressing to be. Neither of us wanted to be anywhere else. The last person I had expected at my door had turned out to be the first person in a long time who told me the truth simply because it needed to be told. And sometimes that is exactly where things start. Not with a plan. Not with anything clean or simple or obvious from the outside. Just with an honest knock on an ordinary Wednesday night. And 2 people figuring out, slowly and carefully and correctly, what to do with the room they were standing in together. Underscore. What would you have done if your best friend's wife showed up at your door to tell you the truth about something he had done? And have you ever found something real in a place you never thought to look? Tell me in the comments. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.